Hallo.
The movie begins with Annie making breakfast for her daughters. While they're eating, she goes to talk to her husband Peter, who tells her to prepare a room for his son Gustav because he's coming to live with them. Annie tells him not to worry and warmly welcomes Gustav into the family. Later, we see Annie talking to a woman at work, and we learn that she's a highly respected lawyer. The woman has filed a lawsuit against a man who got her pregnant and then disappeared. The next day, Annie is sitting in the garden working when Peter arrives with Gustav. She warmly greets him, and they all go inside to eat together. The girls are excited to finally have an older brother, so they show him their drawings and even give him a small keychain for his new room key. But Gustav clearly doesn't enjoy social situations. He stays quiet the entire time and seems cold and distant. The following day, Annie comes home from work and notices Gustav's keychain lying in front of the house. She goes inside and starts cleaning up, then enters Gustav's room. But at that moment, Gustav has just gotten out of the shower and is barely dressed. Annie tries talking to him and comments on the book he's reading, but he completely ignores her. She even jokes around a little to make him loosen up, but he remains emotionless and silent. That night, the woman from Annie's case comes to her house. She wants to run away and leave everything behind because she's afraid the judge won't believe her in court. But Annie tells her that if she gives up now, she'll regret it forever, and eventually convinces her to continue with the case. The next day, Annie comes home from work and overhears Peter and Gustav arguing. Peter keeps trying to control Gustav's behavior and decisions, but Gustav hates being treated that way and wants to make his own choices and live life on his own terms. That night, Annie tells Peter to go easier on Gustav since they had been apart for such a long time. But in the middle of their conversation, Peter receives a phone call. Annie tries to get close to him and comfort him a little, but he simply leaves and walks away. The next day, Annie is at the courthouse, and we learn that she lost the young woman's case. Annie tries to speak with her afterward, but the girl angrily tells her, "I told you they wouldn't believe me." Upset and disappointed, she leaves. When Annie returns home, she finds the front door open and realizes that thieves have broken into the house and stolen all the valuable items. She immediately calls Peter, tells him what happened, and explains that she already contacted the police, who are on their way. When Gustav arrives home, Annie asks him to check whether anything of his was stolen too. Later, we see Annie at work while her boss criticizes her harshly for losing the case, warning her that failures like this could ruin the firm's reputation. That evening, Annie is at home washing Gustav's clothes when she suddenly finds the keychain she thought she had dropped outside the house the day she came back from work. She realizes it had actually been in her bag the entire time, and she simply forgot to give it back to him. A little later, Annie is sitting in the living room when Gustav comes home. She tells him, "I found your key earlier outside the house, but I forgot to give it back to you." Gustav thanks her, but then Annie says she actually found it in his clothes after the house was robbed and after her bag had been stolen. At that moment, she directly confronts him and asks where the stolen items are. Gustav calmly denies stealing anything and tells her, "If you want to tell my father, then go ahead." Annie replies that if the police get involved, they'll find out the truth anyway. But Gustav smirks and tells her, "You really don't know me very well." Annie then warns him that his entire future could be destroyed because of this. However, she says there's still a chance she won't tell anyone, as long as he starts behaving better, becomes part of the family, and changes his attitude. Gustav quietly takes the key without saying a word. After that, we start seeing him getting closer to the girls and spending more time with them. One night, while Annie is working late, Gustav comes home with a girl. It seems like he thought his stepmother was asleep, and he was planning to spend the night with her. But when he notices Annie awake, he casually introduces the girl to her before they leave together. Later that night, before going to bed, Annie stares at herself in the mirror, clearly imagining what Gustav and the girl might be doing together. The next day, Annie is back in court, this time dealing with a case involving a young man. After work, she returns home and finds Peter busy working. She walks over to him flirtatiously, and Peter immediately responds. They grew closer to each other and spent the night together enjoying each other's company. The following day, Gustav spends time with Annie and the girls at a lake. They all swim together, and there's obvious tension and subtle physical closeness between Annie and Gustav while they're in the water. By the end of the day, they head back home, and the girls quickly fall asleep from exhaustion. Annie and Gustav stay up together, sharing a couple of drinks and talking peacefully. They joke around, and Annie notices the tattoo on Gustav's arm. She becomes fascinated by it, and Gustav tells her that he actually knows how to draw tattoos. He even gives her a small one himself. The next day, they host a dinner party at the house with some of Peter's friends. But Annie feels completely irritated and disconnected from everyone there and from the conversations they're having. Suddenly, she turns on loud music and starts dancing wildly, looking like she's completely lost in another world. By the end of the night, Annie gets tired of the party altogether. She leaves Peter behind, takes Gustav with her, and the two of them head to a bar alone, where they sit together and share a few drinks. At the bar, Annie asks Gustav about the girl he was with earlier and asks him how things are going between them. Gustav says everything is fine, but Annie replies that maybe she's not really the kind of girl who can truly make him happy. Gustav looks at her and asks, "Happy in what way exactly?" Annie gives him a meaningful look and tells him that he already knows what she means. Then Gustav turns the question back on her and asks how things are going with Peter. Annie tells him everything is fine and says she doubts he'd enjoy hearing details about his father anyway. Just then, Gustav receives a message from his girlfriend, so he tells Annie he has to leave. Annie goes back home completely drunk, and Peter immediately starts arguing with her because she embarrassed him in front of everyone by leaving the party early. The next day, the family spends time playing together. Annie hides from Peter as part of the game, but Gustav comes and hides beside her. In that moment, he casually grabs her hand, but while it means nothing to him, Annie's mind starts drifting somewhere completely different. That night, Annie can't sleep. Eventually, she does something nobody would expect. She quietly goes to Gustav's room. They sit together talking for a long time. They grew closer to each other and spent the night together enjoying each other's company. The following day, Annie decides to do something nice for him and buys Gustav a laptop so he can study on it. But when Peter finds out, he becomes upset because he feels like he should have been the one to buy it for his son, not her. Annie calms him down and tells him that they're family and there's no difference between them. After that, we see Gustav becoming much more involved with the girls, playing with them and acting more like part of the family. That night, Annie and Peter come home together, but Annie is acting restless and emotionally overwhelmed. She suddenly pushes Peter against the wall, trying to spark intimacy between them. Peter laughs nervously and tells her to calm down because the kids are home. He takes her upstairs, and they spend the night together, but Annie clearly feels something is missing. The chemistry and excitement she's craving just aren't there anymore, and during the moment, her frustration starts showing. Later on, we see Annie back at work, where she meets a young woman in her office. We then learn that the young woman Annie meets at work is suffering from domestic abuse. Her father comes home drunk almost every night and violently beats her. Annie tries convincing her to contact the police so they can help, but the girl refuses because she's terrified of her father. When Annie returns home later, Gustav notices her, and the two grow emotionally close. But while they're together, Peter suddenly comes home earlier than expected, and the moment they hear his voice, they immediately stop what they were doing. When Peter walks in, Annie asks him why he came home so early, and he smiles at her and says, "I missed you." As time passes, Annie and Gustav continue their secret relationship, and the feelings between them only grow stronger. They keep living like this until the day of Annie's daughter's birthday party. During the crowded celebration, Gustav pulls Annie aside, wanting a private moment with her. But by pure accident, Annie's sister sees them behaving suspiciously together. Annie immediately realizes what happened and panics. She runs after her sister, desperately trying to explain the situation, but her sister harshly confronts her and tells her that what she's doing is completely wrong. Those words finally hit Annie hard and make her realize how far things have gone. After that, when Gustav tries getting close to her again, Annie tells him to leave her alone and stay away from her. But Gustav notices the sudden change in her behavior and starts acting recklessly. He climbs up a tree during the birthday party and begins throwing fruit at everyone, embarrassing Peter in front of all the guests. Things get even worse when he suddenly slips and falls from the tree. Peter rushes toward him in panic, worried that he's seriously hurt, but Gustav reveals that he was only joking around. At that point, Peter loses his temper because Gustav humiliated him in front of everyone. Later that night, Annie sits down with Peter and gives him an ultimatum. She tells him, "You have two choices now, either me and the children, or your son, because Gustav and I can't keep living together in the same house anymore." Peter is completely torn and unable to make a decision. The next day, Annie meets with Gustav, and they talk about everything that has happened between them. Annie tells him that they have to stop what they're doing because it's wrong and can't continue any longer. Later, Annie sits with Peter, and he tells her that he's taking Gustav to the countryside for a couple of days. Annie coldly replies, "Do whatever you want." After they leave, Annie stays home alone with her daughters, trying to return life to the way it used to be before everything became so complicated. The following day, Annie goes to visit her sister, hoping to fix their relationship after what happened at the birthday party when she was caught with Gustav in a suspicious situation. But her sister clearly still can't accept what Annie did and refuses to even talk to her. Later, Annie takes the girls to their training practice. While driving, she becomes lost in her thoughts and ends up getting into a car accident. Thankfully, she survives without any serious injuries. When she finally returns home, she discovers that Peter and Gustav are back from their trip. Annie immediately looks nervous and terrified, overwhelmed by fear because of everything that happened between her and Gustav. That night, they all sit together for dinner. During the conversation, Peter reveals something shocking. While he and Gustav were away together, Gustav broke down crying and confessed that he had been involved with Annie. Annie instantly denies it and asks Peter, "Do you really believe something like that?" Peter admits that he doesn't know who to believe anymore. He says, "Why would he tell me something like that if it wasn't true?" Confused and emotionally destroyed, Peter has no idea what to do next. At that point, Annie desperately tries to turn everything against Gustav. She claims that he was actually the one who robbed the house and says that when she discovered the truth, she chose not to expose him. Then she starts acting furious and heartbroken, pretending she can't stay in the house anymore. She reminds Peter that one of them was always going to leave eventually. Finally, Annie tells him, "I'll leave. And when you buy me a new house, or when Gustav is gone, then call me." In the end, Peter calms Annie down and pulls her into his arms, somehow trying to move past everything, even though it's hard to understand how the situation could possibly be ignored that easily. The next day, Peter sits down with both Annie and Gustav so they can finally talk openly about everything that happened. Gustav looks directly at him and says, "I'm not lying to you. What happened between me and your wife was real." Hearing that, Peter immediately loses his temper. He tells Gustav that this family was built on trust, and if he can't live by those values, then he has no place among them. Peter continues angrily, saying, "Ever since you came into this house, nothing but problems and disasters have happened. Before you arrived, our lives were peaceful." Meanwhile, Annie keeps pretending to be innocent. She walks over to Gustav, acting concerned, and tries to calm him down. But Gustav suddenly stands up, spits in her face, and storms out. At that moment, Annie tells Peter, from now on, he's no longer part of this family. Soon after, Gustav packs his things, and Peter drives him back to his mother's house. Later, we see Peter sitting alone, clearly heartbroken. Deep down, he knows that at his son's age, he should have stood by him instead of abandoning him. Then the doorbell rings. Annie opens the door and finds the young girl who had been suffering from domestic abuse. The girl brings her a bouquet of flowers and thanks Annie for helping her and standing by her side. That moment gives Annie a sense of comfort and positive energy, almost like a chance to return to her normal life again. The next day, Annie goes back to work, but she's shocked to find Gustav waiting for her there. She stays calm, takes him into her office, and closes the door so nobody can hear their conversation. Inside the office, Gustav gives her an ultimatum. He tells her that she has to confess everything to Peter and admit the truth about their relationship because of her, he has already lost his father forever. Then he warns her that if she refuses, he'll report her to the authorities, since their relationship was illegal. Gustav reminds her that he's still legally underage and that what happened between them could destroy her entire life. Annie looks at Gustav calmly and tells him that she doesn't respond to threats. She says that none of what he's saying scares her because there's no actual proof of anything between them. At that moment, Gustav's expression completely changes. He realizes that Annie has managed to take control of the situation and turn everything against him. He understands that he has no way out anymore. Annie then tells him that he only has one option left: go back to his father, apologize for everything, and let life return to normal so they can both forget what happened between them. But Gustav refuses to listen. That night, we see Gustav returning to their house. He stands outside yelling angrily, forcing Annie to come outside and confront him. Annie tells him to leave immediately because Peter is never going to forgive him or help him anymore. When Gustav suddenly tries to move closer to her, Annie pushes him away, causing him to fall to the ground. In that moment, Gustav looks completely broken and humiliated before finally getting up and leaving. Later on, Annie and Peter are sitting with friends at a dinner gathering, trying to act normal again. But near the end of the evening, Peter receives a phone call from Gustav's mother. Panicked, she tells him that Gustav still hasn't come home and that nobody knows where he is. She's terrified and worried something may have happened to him. Peter immediately tries to calm her down and tells her not to panic because he'll handle it. Soon after, Peter returns home to pack his things. He decides to travel back to the city where his ex-wife lives so he can help with the investigation and search for their missing son. After some time, Peter finally returns home with devastating news. He tells Annie that a fisherman found Gustav's body in the forest and reported it to the police. After the autopsy, the authorities discovered that Gustav had died from a combination of drugs and alcohol. Peter is completely shattered while telling her what happened. He blames himself deeply, believing that he should have stood by his son instead of pushing him away and leaving him alone when he needed him the most. Annie tries to comfort him and get close to him, but Peter angrily pushes her away. Later, we see Annie alone, crying endlessly and overwhelmed with guilt over everything that happened to Gustav. Deep down, she knows that she was one of the biggest reasons that drove him toward destroying himself. At one point, Annie even starts imagining Gustav's ghost standing behind her, showing how badly her guilt is consuming her from the inside. From that moment on, Annie and Peter begin living like strangers inside the same house, barely speaking to each other anymore. And in the end, the story reminds us that every wrong decision eventually leads to destruction, and once everything falls apart, it's almost impossible to fix it again. So stay away from anything that can ruin your life, my friend, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if this is your first time watching. See you next time.